Welcome to Doc's Lab and our third Master Series. Welcome to Doc's Lab and our third Master Series. I do believe that this is the 7th video on production engineering, and I do believe it's the 3rd video on production tools. And in this video, we want to talk about written music, its role and importance. So before we get started, again, like the last video, is just relax, don't get scared about it. I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible so that you start utilizing it and start trying to use it in your productions, because of how important it is to help you build and visualize your music, so that you know there's a lot of things that can help you see, and it gives you another area to visualize. You can visualize it in your mind, you can visualize it with your instrument, you can visualize it in your DAW, you can visualize it on the written music. It just gives you another area to visualize what you're doing while you're working things out and while you're constructing things. So don't be scared of it. Like the last video, I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible so that you have a different, fresh look at written music, so that you can become a better musician and a better producer. So hang on and let's take a look at written music. Okay, so before we take a look at written music, let's talk about what written music means to me. Now, to me, when I first started, that I did not like written music, because for some reason I kept getting in my head as I was learning it that I was going to be sitting in front of a piece of written music and a sheet music and doing this all the time, which it really did not stir my emotions and my feelings much, and it really alienated me from it for a while. So if you're going to do that, which is great, I know people who are phenomenal and they can go pick up on just about any piece of sheet music, read it and play it. Well, bam, gone and good. Does that make sense? But don't get so excited to go there right away. The first initial thing that now sometimes I do, but I had to take a couple steps back, because for me, written music was, first of all, it helped me be able to visualize what I'm doing. Everything's frozen in time, and I can see every moment in time, no matter how small the moment is, frozen in time, and all the instruments together, so I can work things out on the piece of paper. So that way that I've got at least 3 or 4 different ways to do this. I work it out in my head, I work it out on my instrument, I work it out in my DAW by recording tracks and seeing things, how things are working together, and I work it out in the written music that's just frozen in time visually. Does that make sense? In a DAW, it's frozen in time with audio, so you can review it and review it and review it, and on the paper, it's frozen in time visually. It's a different way to see it, which is a beautiful thing once you get used to it. And that's what it means to me, because when I'm noodling around with my guitar, and then I start recording stuff, and I throw a bass track or some vocals, and I start writing it on our written music. That way that I've got different places to visualize what's happening. And I noodle around on my guitar, like I talked about in the last video, and I'll noodle around on paper. Once you get used to seeing it on paper and you get used to the concept, that you can hear it in your mind. You will start to hear it in your mind. You can start noodling around with how chords are working together with melody lines, and noodle around on the paper instead of your instrument sometimes to try to work things out, which is just another place to try to work things out. And it really helps you to visualize what you're building, which I keep it that simple most of the time, because as I'm going along, and especially bigger productions, that I can see what's happening. I can listen to it in the DAW, I can play it on my instrument, I can look it on the piece of paper, and it doesn't always have to written like it, it's really complicated writing. Sometimes I keep it pretty simple and don't write it out, with all the articulations and emotional things until later, until I start working that out. But that's the other thing, is that you start to improve as a musician, as a producer, and a composer, because first of all, like we talked about in the last video, you really want to work on your instruments and learning your theory and getting comfortable with your instrument and getting fluent with it. And it really makes you take a look at how important every moment and time is. So you ever have people go, well, in some things it's just got to be accurate. Bop, 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 bop. And in some things you let it roll a little bit. Bum, 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 bum. And it's not exactly feeling like it's in time because you're giving a little bit, because it gives it that feeling and that groove, and you get a much better understanding of that, and it helps your performances, your ability to work on your instrument. It improves. You can break things down, to a visual concept in your mind, so that you can practice what you're trying to do and say, no, my timing on that has got to be so you can visualize what's going on there with it, and then it helps you practice and become more fluent with your instrument and your vocals and your piano to help you. And it's going to really help you there. Later on, you'll see that it's a great tool to help you build, which you'll see when we start actually looking at written music, that you can build things, seeing how things are working together, how progressions are working with melody lines, how harmonies are working together, how your percussion is working together with your bass line, how dynamics are working together, how things are, supportive of other things at every single moment of time, because every single moment of time is of utmost importance in a great production. And like I said, sometimes the most simple productions are phenomenal productions. Everybody in the band's doing fairly simple things well. Does that make sense? And you can get in there and do fairly simple things with written music, and you just be amazed how good of a production you come out with. And it just helps you build it so it's built well. And you got another place to visualize it. Visualize it in your head, visualize it on your instrument, visualize it by recording your DAW, see how things work, visualize it on the music, how it's, structured and built together, and how things are working together. It just gives you a whole new place to see your music. And the more you get used to it, the more you will see that it's like the DAW, only visually. Does that make sense? It's the same kind of concept, only you're seeing the music rather than hearing the music. And as you get used to that, it's beautiful, because you can actually visualize what's happening. And the more you get used to it, it's almost like you're hearing it. And it's just cool, because then you can start working things out. And you get out your piano and you're looking at it and writing things out and you're checking things, how it's working. Yeah, because like I said, on the piano, you got two hands that you can really work things out and see how things are working together while you're looking at the written music, and then recording it, and how's it actually sound? Yeah, okay, it is working. All right, yeah, cool. Does that sound, wow, whatever you're doing. And it's another tool to really help you. And that's what it means to me, because it's just another way to help you noodle around and help you work things out and help you visualize if there's issues and help you look at, things when you're feeling them, feelings and emotions, and how things are working together when you start doing something that, how's that actually looking, and how's it working with other things. And don't make it so sterile. Don't make the music sterile, because the better you get at it, the more emotional it'll get and the more feelings it'll have, because you will figure out little notations to help you put that feelings, emotions in there. Does that make sense? And you'd be surprised, I make little notes all over my music there, because there's no notation for that. I don't know, I'm doing something or I'm feeling something, and well, it just doesn't work that way, and that notation doesn't work, because I'm like, pow, wow, wow, wow. There's the notation. I need to scribble some stuff on there to make the feeling, and you start, and it really helps you work things out, because then you're really seriously microanalyzing your performances and what you're doing, and it's going to help make you a better musician, which it did for me, and help make sure that continues to happen as you produce. So, that's, when you're going through the production, that, and then finalize it. You're finalizing a rough draft that you've done in your draw, and you're looking at the music and you're finalizing that to where it's go time. It's time to really practice that, and, to get good captures, and you've checked everything. It's another place to check the rocket ship before you take off, right? To make sure everything's in order the way it should be. before you start really practicing to get those really good captures. So that's what it means to me, you know, for the most part. So I hope that helps you some, and you will hopefully in the next part really get to see how simple it is. And you can make huge complexities out of the basic building blocks and the basic structures that are written music, but don't get scared about it. The more you can take all those basic building blocks and all those basic structures and build them into huge complexities, that doesn't mean you have to, but just keep breaking it down in your mind to the simple things. That way the huge complexity that you may build makes sense to you, so you don't get lost and confused by it and scared by it, because that's was of most help to me when I finally got comfortable with written music. So let's take a look at written music. Okay, so first of all, on my channel, on Music Theory 11 here on Doc's Music Theory Lab, and number 12, that they give the basics of notation. So I suggest you watch that because it'll give you a really quick preview into music notation, the simple things you really need to focus on to get you started. And you can study on more advanced things as you get going. The next thing is I've got a bunch of books like this that are for learning to read music. And you normally, in any of these books for the guitar or piano or whatever instrument you're working on, normally the first 3 or 4 books give you a pretty good understanding of the basics of music notation to get you started. So I've done all of them. I mean, I really went through a lot of them when I was learning, till I learned what was most important, and then I wish I had learned a little bit differently. But I would teach you differently. You're being producing music rather than being a concert pianist for the Philharmonic Orchestra, so we're kind of going about it a little bit differently. So the next thing I want to talk about is something really cool. Is we talked a little bit about your sheet music and your software. Written music is like a visual DAW, so that you can work it out with it and noodle around on it, work things out on it, get comfortable with things, working out your theory and all kinds of things right on the piece of software. And on top of it, that you can actually play the music as you get things done on there, the drums or the bass or anything else, you can actually play it. It'll actually, the software will actually play it, so you have a pretty good understanding of what's going on and what it's, you know, the basics of it sound like, which is really cool. Sometimes I'll just write with my piece of software. This is Sibelius. And sometimes I'll just write with this, never even touch an instrument until I got a pretty good rough draft going on of what I'm trying to do, and then I'll start working out with the instruments in my DAW. Sometimes I'll jump back and forth a little bit because I really want to hear what's going on with my expressions and articulations and all kinds of things. That's kind of hard sometimes to do with the piece of software. But really keep that in mind to help you get going. The next thing is, when you start out, the most simple timing structure is 4/4. Stay inside that safety net for a while. You can do huge complexities with that simple timing of 4/4. And there you can do monumentally huge complexities inside of a measure with that timing signature. Stay there for a while until you get really fluent and comfortable with your instruments, your basic music theory, and your writing. Just stay there for a while. And also with your scales. Stick around a major or minor scale. There's a major scale and its relative minor that was talked about in those videos I pointed you out to look at. But stay there. I know that sometimes I just get noodling around all over the place, and I'm not even trying to play in key, and I just get moving around. Then later on, I kind of can figure out what key I'm going to choose to be in. But I normally relate it to a major or minor scale, because otherwise I have to relate it to some exotic scale or an augmented scale or diminished scale or something, and it gets really complicated. And then I got to change and after 3 measures later because it's really getting off the wall, and then I'll come back to it. It gets complicated. So stick with those scales. You know, it's G major or it's E minor, you know, and then if it goes out of scale or out of key a little bit, that's okay. Try to fall back into it or modulate into a different key. Does that make sense? Change to a different key if it goes somewhere else. As long as it sounds good to you, it's okay. That way, you've got some real basic structures to get fluent in. Because when I started learning my guitar, that I found that I worked within those scales and to get fluent with all my articulations, my bends, my vibrato, you know, my singing and everything. Worked within there until I got really fluent and comfortable, and then started branching out to where I'd be playing a G chord in the key of G, but then I'd play like a D flat minor. That's not in key, but I'd go back into key up here in A minor. and it sounded cool. It's where I wanted to go, and sometimes I play chords or notes that aren't in scale or in key, but I try to fall back into key. That way I don't get wandering around all over the place. And it makes it much easier for you to learn. Get fluent with your instruments like we talked about, get fluent with your basic music theory like we talked about, and get really comfortable with the written music. Stay there for a while. It's like a safety net. Does that make sense? And you will find you will progress really well and quickly that way. Later on, when you start branching out, you want to try to do something in an augmented key or scale or diminished or some exotic scale or harmonic minor or melodic scale or something like that. That's great, but get fluent there. Then you'll understand when you go to change their scales, the slight differences there are, so you don't get lost in that and get frustrated. And when you're writing your music, and just because it can get complicated, you got really wild timing signatures, really exotic scales, and you're moving around in that, and wait until you get pretty fluent and comfortable. So that's my suggestion as you get started, and you will find you will very much enjoy the written music and your theory and your instruments much more, and you will progress much better. So let's take a look at the notation itself. Okay, so the first thing I want to address a couple different things. First of all, that sometimes I'll just pull out my software like a Sibelius here and just start writing in it, because I can write the drums, the bass, my guitars, the basics of my vocals, and also I've got tons of other instruments that I can experiment with. There are tons of different instruments that you can pull onto the timeline. European guitars, Hawaiian guitars, there is African unpitched percussion. Tons of different instruments, and you can download all kinds of different ones to experiment with. You can Google them and hear what they're really supposed to sound like for real, and then start working with them. It's a great place because it's like a DAW that you can experiment with these different instruments, and you can take them into your DAW and really fine-tune what you're doing with them. But I sometimes will just write inside of this to where I'll actually I won't even pick up an instrument except for just to kind of see where I'm going and start building just in there, and then press play, go in there and press play and see what's going on. It's amazing. It's like a visual DAW that can also do audio, also the basics of it. And you'll be amazed at what you can get done. The next thing I want to talk about is a simple thing that one measure. You have one measure from here to here, playing in 4/4. 4 beats per measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's amazing all the complexities you can do. And it gives you mountains of real estate, because you start to realize you can do lots of all kinds of things. It's a lot of real estate between here and here to do all kinds of stuff with all kinds of different instruments as you in that one measure. And most things you're writing are 3, 4 measures, 6 measures long. That isn't that much, that aren't that long, that you can really get in there and do some really complicated, complex things, building different instruments, doing offbeats, doing things a little bit out of time of each other, different harmonies, that one instrument's playing one note, the other instrument's playing another note, the other instrument's playing another note, and the other instrument's playing another note, and it's building a complex chord like that. That ideas you would have never thought of just messing around with your guitar or your piano or something like that, because it opens up worlds of possibilities so that you see how much real estate you actually have inside of one measure. You can visualize it, and on top of it, you can play it to kind of hear what's happening. So you really get a good understanding of visualizing your music theory, what you're building, and seeing how your structures go together visually when you're building things. And, it's really simple that most music, most instruments in Western music are it's pretty simple. And you have, like, the drums are normally a separate notation for your drums. Like, this is a snare, this is a kick drum, this is a hi-hat, this over here is a crash cymbal. So whatever, you're using, software using, it'll dictate what that is. And you can just plunk that in with your MIDI keyboard. You can do all this, write all this in with your MIDI keyboard. Just pick up your MIDI keyboard and start writing. I mean, it's just so cool. You will be amazed how much you will improve as a producer and a musician and a performer from the experience and utilizing this wonderful tool. The next thing, in those videos that I pointed out to you, will show you the basics of notation. I mean, you're dealing with some really basic things. You have, notes, rests, and, very simple things, you know, when you get in there, that it's the real simple things. You get into some things that you get into, like duplets, triplets, quadruplets, things like that. You're going to want to look at that a little bit and research that a little bit. But most of it's pretty basic. Does that make sense? And when you get into notations, you want to kind of review what you're dealing with when you're the clefs, key signatures, timing signatures, bar lines, what that means. Some pretty simple things. Then you get into a little bit more complex things that, for the most part, when you first get going, you really want to get the basics down to where it may sound a little robotic if you play it, and it doesn't have all the articulations and all the feelings and emotions that you're going to put in there, but it gets it structured really well. So that when you pick up your guitar, your sax, or whatever you're doing, your piano, and you start adding more feeling to it, then you go in there and start making little notations. And I know a lot of people will get out in the text area and make little notations all over the place, and it's like a scratch pad for you to work things out. Does that make sense? And when you start to get a little bit better, that you will get in there and the piece of software will help you to understand what all these little notations for articulations and expression things that you're doing, what they mean. Does that make sense? And it doesn't take that much, and it won't take that long for you. The more complicated your things get, the more use you're going to get of all the little notation things to help you. Just be careful, don't get lost in that, because when I first got into it, it was very frustrating, because then I just felt like I was spending way too much time on the written music rather than making music. And so it very much became a scratch pad for me. Later on, as I became better, I refined it to where it comes out looking really beautiful, and it's a beautiful piece of work, like a piece of poetry or something. And you get to a point where it is, and you can play it, and and it sounds pretty good. The better the software you got and the better sound fonts you have, the better it's going to sound. And on top of it, the piece of software will give you, it's got great help on tutorials about how to use it. If you go to the websites, the basics of music and written music, place like MuseScore will have mountains of information for you to dig around in. But get doing some simple productions. Simple production, just get started. Once you've watched those videos and you've looked around at the basic notations, that you'll really start to visualize what's going on with it and get making some simple productions. Simple bass lines, simple guitar stuff, simple piano stuff, simple vocals, simple drum lines, simple things that you can embellish with some orchestral stuff if you want, or some synth stuff or stuff like that, background stuff, and notate it out. You'll really be able to visualize what's going on and understand. You will have a much better understanding of the things we're talking about. And as you get better and better and better with it, that you will see that your performances improve, because when you start looking at all this stuff going on in these small amounts of time and a little vibrato, you got to put just a little vibrato and then back off because you got to get to that other note. It'll start helping you really work on your performances becoming much better, more accurate, and clearer performances, so you get much better captures, because you will really be focused on performing. Everything is performed well on its own, and everything works together well, so that all the performances come out sounding really good. From the performances themselves and the music and the dynamics, the articulations and everything. It helps you micro-analyze it, as well as being a scratch pad to work things out. Like I said, sometimes I won't even pick up an instrument, and I'll just pull out my piece of software and start noodling around ideas. I might pick up my guitar, get a little idea going, then I start jotting things down, and then I get it out, and I can start figuring out what bass lines are going to be, what the drums are going to be, what anything else might be, backing synths and stuff like that, a basic idea of what's going on there. And it gives you fonts to work with. So it might not be exactly what you would do when you're dealing with synthesizers, but we'll talk about that later on. Synthesizers are a whole different creation tool when you're being a producer, and we will talk about them some. But it's pretty simple. Most of the basic things you need to worry about aren't that complicated. If you watch those videos on notation, you'll get it right away and stay within that safety net and just start putting things together. Simple things, use simple chord progressions, G, A, F, something like that with a little melody line going on, and start writing out and then seeing how things are working together, so you can start utilizing. You'll find out that one of the biggest things I found out, that I get something simple going on in a measure, and all of a sudden I found out that I really started beginning to see how much real estate that really is. And, you know, to keep things clear, to keep things from not getting muddy, make things stand out where they're supposed to. Other things are supportive, but not standing on top of things. And all the different things I could do. I could have stuff going on, you know, every different instrument, 100 different instruments. Stuff going on all over the place in 1 or 2 measures, you know, and it would just be like, wow, that is amazing. I can build these wild complexities even within this simple safety net with all the tools that I have in this piece of software. That way when I get in my DAW and I start recording stuff to see how things are actually sounding, working together, it gives me a much clearer vision of what I'm trying to do, so that my production has a much clearer vision and a much better foundation to work from. And it's a huge tool to help you get that done as a producer. Does that make sense? And plus, you get really familiar with all these concepts we're talking about in a whole different way, in a different musical way that's visually, that you can really see what's going on there. So you can spot problems. You can be like, well, no, if I do that with that guitar and the bass doing that, that harmony is not going to work out right, or that timing of it, that snare hitting right there, you know, before that bass or after that bass, or when that thing's going on together right there, that ain't right. I need to scoot that up a little bit. That's going to be like, you know, another 8th beat off there or something. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's it. All right. You know, does that make sense? And you can see all that stuff happening. The more you do it, the more this won't look like Greek to you or something like that. It'll start to make sense because you break it down into smaller and smaller building blocks that you've got, like the simple 4/4 timing, 4 beats is 1 measure, right? And you start breaking it down into smaller and smaller pieces to where it makes much more sense what's happening. So this doesn't look like some kind of mess you're looking at, like, what is that? Well, I mean, it's a couple notes and some harmonies and some chords. This is a chordal structure that's being formed there, you know, and something else is going on with the rhythm section and the bass section, because you can see that the bass and the drums really work together as percussion foundations you work in, and the bass is really crosses the line sometime to being working with the drums and being a musical instrument also. So it fills both those roles a lot when you're producing, especially with the simple complemented instruments we talked about that you should really get familiar with. And you can really start being able to build your foundations with your bass and your drums. And how's that working with, you know, the keys and the synth and the guitar and the vocals, you know? I mean, what's going to harmonies, you know? That it's, you know, riding this, keeping that basic timing and adding a little bit of melodic element to it with the bass, but it's your foundation. You know, you really get to visualize all these things much better to see how everything's working together. Everything works well on its own, and it works really well together with everything else. And you start to really be able to visualize that well, and this stuff starts to make much more sense to you why you'd want to do that. And some DAWs like PreSonus, you know, Studio One, have music notation software built right into it to where you can sit there and write the music for you while you're going along, and you can visualize, see what's happening. Does that make sense? It's really cool. And once you start getting used to it, you know, you will really start to get to the point to where it becomes, it's like a visual DAW that can actually play it also to really help you work things out. And you will find it's an invaluable tool to help you do things. You can really see how every moment in time is of utmost importance, how it works by itself, how it works with other things, and you can catch mountains of things going on before you ever get in the DAW and start working on your performances, because you want your bass to go boom, boom, ba, 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 bang, boom, boom, ba, boom, boom, bow, boom, you know, and you're working all this stuff out. You got your basic scratch pad. What's that doing with the drums and guitars going chank, 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 and the marabas, whatever you got going on, and you just can visualize that so easy, all happening right there before you. And then you can even play it and test it to see how it's working well together before you start dragging yourself into the DAW and start trying to perform all these things and work on your performances to try to get good captures, that you've got really good foundations and a good scratch pad of what you want to get done, and a good idea with notations. You make a little text notations all over the place about, well, right here I want the guitar to go bang, you know, I want this little funky thing or this, you know, thing happen or something. You can write whatever you want on there as a scratch pad as you work things out, you know, as you pull, you go, well, I don't know, pull out your bass, pull out your piano, see how that's actually sounding there. Yeah, that'll be fine. I'm like a little notation here. As you get better, you'll start using the notations for articulations and expressions and all kinds of things like that, more and more and more. But as you get better and better using it, but don't be in such a hurry. Just get using it. Does that make sense? That way that it starts to reveal itself as what a cool environment is. I mean, it's like a visual DAW that you can pull out and you don't even need your studio. You just get out your software and start cruising along and build entire productions. Great productions. You know, you turn on the radio here with this Whitney Houston production or this big EDM production, you can build it right in the piece of software right there and never even pull out an instrument or open your DAW or anything. It's amazing once you start getting used to doing it. So that's my pitch on written music, and it sounds very simple, and we didn't really get into the written music because I'm hoping that you'll go watch those videos and start to see that and just get it and start going. The basics of the notes and the basics of the harmonies and the triads and little things that it does are very simple, and we don't need to sit here for hours talking about it. It'll be very obvious once you get in there and start working with it what it is. And you can Google anything in 2 seconds, get an answer to something you don't understand, or get help on the piece of software. And it won't take you long, but you will find you will improve as a producer, a musician, and an artist. 100, 200, 300% guaranteed. And you will enjoy the production much more because you will be able to see it in a whole new way to work out your theory, your performances, and working with your instruments, and being able to visualize what you're building and really get in there and see how much actual real estate you actually have in a measure is amazing. And as you grow and you start messing with other scales and other timing signatures and things like that, it opens up worlds of possibilities for you to experiment with. So that's my pitch on written music, and I certainly hope you get some software and dive into it because you'll be amazed at what you can do with it. So peace, hope, love. I certainly hope you enjoyed this next video, and I will see you in the next one.